Live from Arlington, Virginia, this is Transport Topics Newsmakers, the digital interview series that gives you access to candid conversations between industry experts and a veteran reporter.
Sponsored by Penske.
Here's your host, Dan Ronan.
Hello and welcome to the latest edition of Newsmakers from Transport Topics. I'm Dan Ronan. I'm really honored to be hosting this conversation with leading figures in the trucking, freight, and logistics industries. Our guest today is one of the industry's leaders. He's Chris Spear, the president and CEO of the American Trucking Associations. He joins us from his office near Washington, D.C. Before we begin our conversation with Chris, I want to tell you that Penske is our sponsor for this edition of Newsmakers. Their leadership is a short message that they'd like to convey to all of you. So let's watch this message together, and we'll be back on the other side with Chris Spear of the ATA.
While most companies have maybe 20 trucks, we have over 300,000. Some people say we're truck nerds. That's cool. We can pinpoint a faulty sensor from across the continent. We can predict when a part will fail and fix it before it ever does, and know why some trucks don't need harder rubber, and some do. We live and breathe trucks and fill our heads with all kinds of truck-like stuff nobody but us thinks about, all so you don't have to, ever again. That's how we deliver confidence. Penske.
First, now a few words about Chris. He's been the president and CEO of ATA for now more than 5 years. He leads the ATA's efforts to advocate and educate people on behalf of the trucking industry, which employs more than 7 million people and moves more than 10 billion tons of freight annually. He has more than 20 years of experience in government affairs with the ATA and others, including Hyundai, Honeywell, and the United States government, as well as the U.S. Senate and the Labor Department, and also a deployment in Iraq. He has been, as I said, with the ATA for more than 5 years. Chris, welcome to Transport Topics Newsmakers. It's good to chat with you. It appears as though the Congress is moving much closer to an infrastructure bill to the president's desk. Are you optimistic that even in these very slow things move along at an inch at a time pace, that it's reasonably close to getting to the president's desk?
I am optimistic, Dan. I feel very, very confident we're going to see this bill move to the president's desk for signature within the coming weeks. And, I think there's a lot of variables right now at play between the House and Senate. Senate, obviously, with a compromised bill that carried 19 senators from the Republican side. You don't have that luxury in the House with their bill. But I do think there is, a way forward for the House to move the Senate package. I think they're looking at ways that they can fund some of the priorities in the House through the reconciliation package, which would come on the back end of the infrastructure bill. And that's procedurally, I think, the strategy that they're taking as it stands. Now, there are some new factors that I think to consider, including the Afghanistan mayhem that we're witnessing on 24/7 news coverage. And that's going to have an impact. It's unrelated to infrastructure directly, but it certainly has an indirect impact in terms of the timing of that bill. The administration continues to get bad publicity for what's happening in Afghanistan. There may be an opportunity for them to deflect some of that by moving a piece of legislation that is deemed bipartisan and good for the country. And however it moves, I'm very confident it's going to be a matter of weeks. It's not if, but when. And I do believe after all the years of ATA advocating this bill to fund roads and bridges, that we're finally going to see it happen. So I don't think it's going to be much longer, Dan.
What are some of the things you like about the legislation? And I'm sure you have some concerns. What are some of those things, both pro and con?
Well, I think the legislation in of itself is a good product. The Senate bill, probably a little leaner in terms of provisions than what we saw come out of the House back in July. We have been approaching this piece of legislation all along as a process. You got to get engaged. You got to work it. You've got provisions in there you don't like. You advocate for changing them. And we've seen that evolution since the House passed their bill and the Senate took up theirs. It's got a lot leaner, a lot lighter. It does not carry a lot of the weight from organized labor. They had requested that the PRO Act be in there, which would eliminate half of the United States that have right to work laws on the books. Those would be gone if that were to pass. That language is not in the bill. The AB 5, similar language from California on independent contractor reclassification is not in the Senate infrastructure bill. And we also don't see a revocation of the F4A, the duplicative meal and rest break language from California that ATA won a couple years ago and has been since upheld by the Ninth Circuit in a 3-0 decision. So those three things are not in. We don't see VMT for trucks only. We don't see tolling provisions. We don't see corporate tax increases. We also see on the safety regulatory side, no revoking of the hours of service flexibility rule, no putting CSA scores back up without some kind of system or program in place to govern it. We don't see side underride guards, speed limiter mandates. The minimum insurance has been dropped. So a lot lighter product in the Senate, and I believe that's going to be the prevailing outcome. And what we do see is a 38% increase in funding for roads and bridges, which we really need badly. And we also see the inclusion of provisions from the Drive Safe Act, allowing that new block of talent to enter our industry between ages 18 and 20 by responsibly training them, giving them the skill set they need, and equipping those trucks with the right technologies to ensure that that driver is safe. Brought into this industry much earlier, we're obviously short on talent, and this is one of the many avenues that we've been actively pursuing to make certain that we put people behind the wheel. I can think of no better audience than that younger group of talent that for so long has escaped us. We have not been able to recruit because they're unable to cross state lines. So that language is in the bill. So I'm very pleased with the final product. I think this is what's going to move. And I do believe in time it's going to be done, and we could celebrate having a very comprehensive infrastructure investment in our country.
With regards to the Drive Act, this is a question I've asked of numerous policy leaders like yourself. You and I have both got children who are both high school and college age. And for the last 40 or 50 years, society, its definition of success seems to have been that starting at about age 10 or 11, we start telling our young people, the only way that you're going to be successful in life is to do really well in high school, go to a 4-year state U or a private college of some sort, and then get into the work world at age 23, 24, and start your career. And for a lot of people, myself included, that was very successful, and I'm very happy with where I've ended up in life, and I'm sure you are as well with you. But for some people, that's not a successful route, and it seems as though we have, as a society, we have really marginalized positions such as truck drivers, electricians, plumbers, folks who, come in from work and take a shower at the end of the day instead of at the beginning of their day. And we've done that. And do we need to change our outlook on that?
I don't think we need to. I think there are a few people that have set that tenor, as you said. I think our society has gravitated toward that over the last few years, and it's clearly been detrimental to a lot of sectors of the economy, including trucking. Denigrating that occupation is the wrong thing to do. These are real people behind the wheel. Their moms, their dads, their husbands, their wives, some of the hardest working, patriotic people in the country. And we need to celebrate them. And what America saw during COVID was a group of our society that stepped up to the plate, got behind the wheel at great risk and uncertainty, and went to work. They drove lanes all the way to New York City to make certain those store shelves were restocked, those test kits were in the hands of first responders, to make certain that the economy did not stop. And prior to that, those 8 million people in our industry and the 3.5 million drivers had continued to do their job without much, if any, recognition. But COVID was a game changer. The image excelled, it soared, and rightfully so. I drove several times across the country and seeing billboards in cornfields and banners hanging off of overpasses thanking a trucker or a police officer waiting at the end of an interstate exit ramp just to simply escort that driver to where he or she could get a hot shower, a warm meal. We had Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts handing out baked goods at truck stops. I mean, this is recognition that is long overdue. And I take great pain to really shed light on that, because that is an image that we haven't seen for decades. And now that we have it, we need to ride that crest. That wave is going to carry us into issues that we need to advocate, explaining to members of the Senate, House, administration, but governors, state legislators on why trucking matters. And so if there's an upside to COVID, that's certainly it. How we sway people to come into the industry feeds off of that image directly. And you're right, I've got 4 kids too that chose military paths. I've got a newly minted second lieutenant, my oldest son at Fort Benning right now, and very proud of the training he's got. And bringing that age group into our industry is part of an essential strategy to really growing our workforce and serving our customers and the economy in general. And if we don't do that, the 71% of the domestic freight in this country that's served by trucks is going to really, really pinch our economy. Inflation is going to be permanent, not temporary. And you're going to see, on the store shelves, 8 apples going down to 3 apples. Your choices are going to get less because we don't have the workforce to service our economy and the demand that exists. So image matters, new talent pools matter, and not stereotyping people. It's their choice. I'm happy with what I've decided to do in life, and I've supported my kids with their choices. We've never forced them or told them they have to go to college. My third is a junior in high school. We just asked him what he wanted to do when he's done with high school. He said, I want to be a mechanic. And I could not be more thrilled. He's very passionate about vehicles. He's very technical. He has a software background, which a lot of vehicles, including trucks, are going to be going forward. And we need more of them. Like drivers, we have a technician shortage. So when I heard that, it just really warmed my heart that he understands where his passion lies, and he's not going to be shy about it, that somebody's not going to push him in a direction that he doesn't want to go just because that's the status quo. And I only share that story with you because I think that's the trend. I think we're going to see a lot more young people decide on their own what's good for them, and that's exactly the way it should be. So as far as our industry is concerned, Dan, we want to make certain it's an open door to people, that they have access to it, good training, good pay, benefits, and a very large expanded family that will welcome them with open arms and take care of them for the long haul. That's the image that we need to ride going forward, and I think it's going to pay dividends.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up that about non-traditional careers and the like, because I've got one son who's a nurse in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and my other son, who's still with me, a high school student, is considering a course as a golf superintendent. He loves horticulture, and he loves he loves the work outside. So whatever makes you happy and makes you feel fulfilled, we tend to have, I think, put people in boxes somewhat, but that's a larger discussion for a time over a cup of coffee someday. A recent Department of Commerce Advisory Committee, as I'm sure you heard about, recommended to Secretary Raimondo that Commerce take a leadership role, and I'm quoting here, take a leadership role to coordinate federal agencies to immediately address the driver shortage that threatens the effectiveness of the nation's critical supply chains. Now, I know Bob Costello, your colleague, is on that committee, but it was heartening, I think, to see that the driver shortage, 70,000 drivers or thereabouts, is getting some attention within the highest levels of the federal government.
Well, it's certainly at the right level. It's just the wrong department. Commerce is obviously an advocate for business, hence the word commerce. They're there to represent the industry's business. It doesn't give them a tremendous amount of power. They're not authorized by law to do a lot in our space other than highlight and advocate for the growth of business and the economy. Where we really need that discussion to happen is at the Department of Labor. And if you look at statute and look at the terminology, the very words shortage are never uttered by the Department of Labor. And the reason they're not is because that language actually triggers certain statutes, including visas, immigration law, things that could bring people in from other countries. So they're very careful at the behest of organized labor, big labor bosses that don't want them talking about issues that are going to bring foreign labor in to supplement the shortages that we're experiencing. Why? They want those jobs going to union members. The problem with that is they don't have union members to fill those jobs. Public and private unions have been on the decline for decades, and they can't bring new people into that setting. And the world's your oyster. If you're an unemployed person right now, you can pick any job you want and probably be paid a lot more for it because there's so much employment open out there and not enough people to fill it. So why do you want to pay dues to a union when you basically have the choice as you wish? And that's a big problem for organized labor. That doesn't necessarily remove their grip on some of the departments that are making decisions right now, and DOL is no exception. Marty Walsh is Secretary of Labor. He's a union boss from Boston. He's going to definitely toe that line. And until they acknowledge that this is a true shortage, we're not going to find reasonable solutions to fix this problem. So I'm optimistic. I'm glad to see Commerce say these things, but it's the wrong department. And until I hear it come out of the words of Marty Walsh and his folks at DOL, it really doesn't mean a whole lot.
Should the Department of Labor also change its classification of truck drivers from the unskilled labor that they're currently classified? Would that help it as well?
Absolutely help. I don't see them doing that either. And that's a shame because it is a skilled profession. These are professional drivers. You have to take courses, you have to be trained, you have to be licensed, you have to renew your license. The amount of work that goes into being a safe driver, a safe company is absolutely essential to safety. And it takes skill to do that. Anybody that's operating equipment that large, that heavy, hauling hazardous chemicals, for instance, they all have additional training and layers of that have to be renewed, have to be credentialed. And if it's not skilled, then what is it? I mean, it really is a skilled profession and it needs to be recognized as such. But they won't do that either because that also opens the door for the immigration status and the visa status. So they're very, very careful about the words they use for that very reason. So we just need to press on with data. This is not rhetorical. It's not emotional. It's fact. And, you're entitled to your own opinions. You're not entitled to your own facts. I think the Department of Labor is very shallow on facts. Their empirical data to back up any case to resist this discussion is very slim. And so I think the more we press on, the more we tell our story and back it up, most importantly, with data, I think we're going to press forward and get what we need. But it takes time. It takes persistence. That's why you need ATA. That's why you need that kind of consistent advocacy, not to just sit on your heels and complain, but to get in the game and try to shape it. Just because somebody at the Department of Labor says no, you've got somebody at Commerce saying yes. Pit the two against one another, make them work against and expose that vulnerability and then argue your case. And ATA is very positioned to do that, not just in the administration, but on the Hill and in the media. And I think the louder we get, sooner or later, we're going to break through that jam and we're going to be able to get some solutions in place that shore up the shortage.
The Biden administration is still relatively new, less than 7 months old. Have you had a chance in your meetings and phone calls and on Zoom calls with Secretary Buttigieg over at the Department of Transportation? If you had a chance and outlined it to him and said, Mr. Secretary, we've got a real serious problem in the industry with driver shortages, and I know other industries have got labor shortages as well, as you just pointed out. But have you addressed this with the Secretary?
I have, and I'll give him an immediate shout out. I think the Secretary and his entire department, the Deputy Secretary, Deputy Administrator at FMCSA, Amir Joshi, I think have been phenomenal. Very accessible, constantly calling us and asking us for counsel. It doesn't mean they're going to take it every time, but the fact that they're taking the time to learn and answer their questions and shape opinions, again, we back it not with emotion and rhetoric, not with complaints and saying no, no, no. We come to the table when they call, we have solutions and we back it with data. And that's why we're getting traction and results with these guys, is we're not the association of no. And I like that. I like the fact that over the safety groups that whine all the time and come to the table with emotion and rhetoric, not that their argument is fruitless, it's just the way they approach it. It just doesn't get traction. You've got to be consistent with facts and really be strategic about how you argue them. And DOT has been outstanding, very receptive of that. Where we're not seeing it, however, is at the Department of Labor. As I said before, this is a discussion that we need, both departments to participate in. I commend DOT because they convened a panel between the two departments in the last couple of months to really look at these issues. It happened just on the heels of the Colonial Pipeline hacking. And when that shut down, those guys at DOT were on the phone immediately, trying to really understand the impact that's going to have on the availability of fuel and how it's going to impact lifestyles. Everybody, not only commuting the lack of fuel in the southeast region of the United States is a very big deal. And the fact they reacted that quickly suggests to me that they are on top of it. What did trouble me in that discussion is the fact that DOT were the ones that had to literally drag the Department of Labor into that discussion. They didn't want to have that conversation. They don't want to do anything that's outside the spectrum of organized labor's campaigns. So that really shows the differences. This is a DOT we can work with, and using it strategically to get DOL to the table to solve these problems, it has to start with recognition of the problem. And so I like where the direction that the Secretary at Transportation, Buttigieg, is going with this, because I think that's the right framework. I think that's the right kind of leadership that's needed to solve these problems.
Chris, we've got about 12 minutes left before we wrap up our conversation, and I want to talk about two very important issues in the remaining time that we have left. Just the other night, 60 Minutes did a 20-minute segment on autonomous trucks and their future role in the industry. I hope you had a chance to see the piece, but where do you see autonomous trucking in the industry, especially with regards to the issue of public acceptance? Because I've often thought that there probably will be the technology here sooner than later to do this, but the real hurdle is going to be the issue of public acceptance, such as when we get on an airplane, we know that the flight management system is doing most of the work, but we know that there's two very competent, capable, federally licensed pilots up front to handle things if things go wrong. What do you think things are going to be at with regards to autonomous trucking?
Well, let me start with flying. I've been flying a considerable amount lately, and I've always said I kind of like the fact that we have two pilots up in the cockpit to take over in the possibility of any unexpected turbulence or weather. It's good to have that perspective up there that's not artificial, that's not a computer driven. But let me tell you, I worked for Honeywell for over 8 years. When you fly commercially, it's usually a Honeywell cockpit or a Rockwell cockpit.
Absolutely.
One of the two, and either company are very capable of flying that plane without pilots. Mm-hmm. Yet we have them there, right? And I would say not just passenger airplanes, but cargo airplanes. Why do we still have pilots in cargo airplanes? That carries over into trucks. It's a security reason just as much as a safety reason. You're not going to turn loose an 80,000-pound vehicle that could be weaponized. We saw that in France. We saw that in Germany. The ability to take equipment of that size and weight and weaponize it is a big factor that nobody really wants to talk about, but it's one of the governing reasons why you're not going to see level 5 anytime soon. And that's particularly true with freight that's being moved for fuel, chemicals, hazardous materials. So, I'm not too concerned about this argument we're going level 5 tomorrow. If anybody's pushing that narrative, they really are selling something that's just way out of its league. We're talking decade, if not more, out before we start seeing that kind of tech hit the street. It's being tested. It's being tested successfully. Innovation is driving that, not government mandates and frameworks. You got people on the Hill that don't even know how to open their own Facebook account. When you go up and testify like I have in front of them, you start talking about V to X, V to I, V to V, and the values that those can generate in terms of safety and operating AEB before someone slams in the back of a truck, the eyes are glazing over. They just don't get it. Where you're seeing it really get traction is at the state and local level where this equipment's being tested. And innovation is outpacing our Congress's ability to keep up with it. No shock, no surprise there. So I think that's where innovation is going to drive the outcome. I do believe that levels 2, 3, and 4 are very exciting. I do believe they're going to improve safety and lower that annual fatality rate, first and foremost. Second, I think you'll get tremendous efficiency out of it, which will certainly lower prices that we pay for goods because they're getting there on time. We lose $74.5 billion a year sitting in traffic. And we're only 4% of the vehicles on the road, yet we're moving 71% of the economy. But also on the environmental side, 67 million tons of emissions just from those 425,000 drivers sitting idle for an entire year, those trucks that are caught in congestion. There's something in this, Dan, for everybody. If you're an environmentalist to somebody who's very pro-capitalism, you're going to see something gain from technology. And it's very exciting as it relates to our industry. But I'm not threatened by it. I also think for drivers, they shouldn't be either. It's going to make them more skilled, more marketable, We're talking software, commercial off-the-shelf technology, integration, how it makes you smarter as a driver to operate that equipment. You're going to be able to see things. The perspective that technology gives the driver is exponential. As far as the technician that services, you're going to need software backgrounds. It's going to make them more marketable, better paid. These things are good investments, and it should attract that younger generation like my son, who has that background, is inspired by it. We want that kind of talent coming into our industry. So I think technology is a catalyst for growth for trucking, and not just in terms of our ability to serve our customers in the economy, but to build our workforce, the future workforce of trucking, because we're making technology a centerpiece for why we matter and why you want to work for us.
Let's discuss, and I'll use the term in quotes, one of your favorite topics, the so-called nuclear verdicts. I know it's easy to get you pretty ramped up on this pretty quickly, and what the Federation is doing to this. A number of states have started to enact some legislation to protect the industry and make it harder for big dollar lawsuits to prevail. Take a few minutes to talk about how that battle is going.
It's going very well. We launched this, as you know, Dan, a year and a half ago in San Diego at our annual meeting. We made it a tier 1 priority. And for too long, I think the Federation was looking at this through the wrong lens. And we took a step back and said, hey, look, we're underwater, with our votes on the Hill for tort reform. But that being said, we are uniquely positioned to coordinate all the states and all their efforts to be able to benchmark, to share, to help them write that legislation, to coordinate strategy of what works and what doesn't. Not every state's going to be able to pass the same law, comprehensive law, but they could maybe get 1 or 2 surgical provisions done, like seatbelt gag rules or phantom damages. These are all opportunities that exist in multiple states that up until now, we've been getting served. We've been getting served by the plaintiff's bar. They're teaching reptile theory to trial lawyers that go into a courtroom, not on the merits of the case before them, but to demonize the carrier for unrelated circumstances and sway that jury to rewarding anywhere from $5 million to $90 million in some cases. And that is an absolute vile profession. Anybody that's in that lane, it should be disgraced. I don't know how you could get up in the morning and look yourself in the mirror. It is that repulsive that you would think that rewarding a jury $90 million to put the hurt on a company, and in many instances could put that company out of business and take people out of the employment ranks and take food off their table. I don't know how you can sleep at night. And that's what we're up against. It's a vile profession. It needs to be dimed out. It needs to be called what it is. And I think our industry's done a phenomenal job in just a year and a half of really changing the game. That we've got them nervous. They are definitely scared of what we're doing in multiple states. Since we launched, Dan, we got victories in Iowa, Missouri, Louisiana, West Virginia, Montana, and just 2 months ago in Texas. We've got 5 more states teed up for this year. And I can guarantee you, the more we do here, the more we're going to put them on the defense. And that's exactly where we want them. They're going to get tired over the next 5 to 10 years of dealing with us. And they're going to move on to some other, profession in the economy that'll just roll over like we had for years. We're not one to roll over. This is trucking, and we are going to fight back, and we're going to expose this profession for what it is. So I'm very, very proud of what we've done so far. It's a beautiful collaboration with our federation. We're perfectly fit at ATA to oversee it. And as you can see from the results, it's working. So it's all good and more to come on that.
Like I said, it's a question I know that you like talking about, and every time we've talked about it, you get pretty amped up pretty quickly, which is okay because you're very passionate about it. I want to ask you in closing a general question about the economy. The economy had a very significant growth in the second quarter, but as an economy comes out of a very horrible pandemic, and we're still struggling with the Delta variant, there's been concerns about the supply chain at the ports. There's detention and demurrage issues at many of these facilities. How closely are you watching the situation regarding the supply chain kinks that are out there right now?
Very. I testified before the Senate Commerce Committee a couple months ago on this very topic. The title was Resiliency in the U.S. Supply Chain. And we have multiple modes there. We certainly are kind of the glue in a lot of that. We had the ports, we had rail. Really kind of looking panoramically at what we're seeing and feeling out there so members of Congress can really begin to understand the complexity I am forever amazed at how resilient the supply chain, quite frankly, is. If you look at everything that we're dealing with right now, in terms of shortage of microchips, not just in passenger cars, but trucks, the availability of equipment, immigration, border enforcement, trade pacts that have gone awry, including China, port strikes, port backup, container issues. If you look at pipeline hacks with Colonial or the Suez Canal getting clogged, and then on top of all of that, layer COVID. How much more, maybe a natural disaster or two sprinkled in there, can the supply chain withstand? It continues to plug along. So it really does raise some questions about how robust, how strong the supply chain is before it begins to crack, weaken, or even crumble. These are the things that we really need to be mindful of. We need to be honest about. No agendas. We just need to understand them, of how much it can withstand. And when you look at the latest agenda, how much money are we going to flood into this economy in terms of COVID relief, now a $3.5 trillion budget reconciliation bill, which is really gifting. We're just handing some certain specific constituencies of this administration a boatload of taxpayer money just to buy votes. That's really all this is for. Why else would you spend the last 8 months cultivating bipartisan support for an infrastructure bill? It was tough, but you did it. You got 19 senators to support it in the end. Why can't you do that with the budget reconciliation bill? Why do you have to cram it through on the heels of that on a party line vote? It doesn't make any sense. So when you look at the supply chain, what is that $3.5 trillion going to do if they pass that? It's going to flood the economy. It's going to prevent people from coming back to work even further. It's going to elevate inflation, not temporary inflation, permanent inflation. We're all going to be paying a lot more for a lot less choice. And that is unacceptable. I don't think America is going to stand for that. And I really believe that the supply chain will reflect that negativity in the most personal way. And I think people are going to look at that going into the mid-year elections next November, and they're going to say, we're done with this. So I just throw that out there as caution. I think there's only so much this supply chain can handle before it does crack, even crumble. And we as trucking obviously are the glue. And we're going to continue to do our job, show up, make certain those goods are delivered. But these are exacerbating circumstances that need to be taken into consideration, Dan, if we're to weather this storm, come out of COVID as cleanly as we can. So I think having that honest discussion is essential. And I'm glad to see that ATA is at the table.
Chris, we're all out of time in terms of our conversation, and I want to thank our sponsor, Penske, for making this Transport Topics Newsmaker webcast available. We appreciate the fine support from Penske. We also want to thank Chris Spear, the president and CEO of the American Trucking Associations, for being generous with his time to answer our questions. Going forward, we are planning more of these Newsmaker events in the near future, and we will always have an announcement soon about when the next webcast will be and who our guest will be. I know it will be a great program, as this one was, and we are very excited to make that upcoming announcement. As for this webcast, it will be available for viewing on demand. Go to ttnews.com for more information about how you can watch our interview with Chris Spear. Again, I'm Dan Ronan with Transport Topics. We thank you for watching.
Thank you for joining us today. For more information on future episodes, visit ttnews.com. This has been Transport Topics Newsmakers.